Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl, aka Artsy Island Girl for Pajama Crafter Stamps. Today I'm going to watercolor on black watercolor cardstock. I'm using the new In Our Hearts Always stamp set. This is a beautiful stamp set, perfect for many different cards. It's got some sentiments in this set, but you can easily use sentiments from other sets with it, and I love those little dragonflies that you can add to the side of it. Now, when you're watercoloring with black cardstock or black watercolor cardstock, the rules are a little bit different than white cardstock. You don't want to use transparent watercolors because they're not going to show up on the black, so you need to make sure you can use something that is going to show on the black. I hadn't used this stamp set yet, so the very first step is using a white eraser on the stamping surface just to remove any possible manufacturing residue. It helps the stamp take the ink a little bit better. This only needs to be done the first time. You don't need to keep doing this every time you go to use this stamp set. I'm using some black watercolor cardstock here, and I'm using a stamp positioner so I can stamp my stamp a couple times to make sure that I have a nice, clean, complete image. So I'm choosing one of the sentiments from the set as well as the kind of wreath or kind of arch leaf stamp set. I'm going to put it on the top part of my stamp positioner. Now, after doing it the first time, I realized that I didn't have the positioning exactly how I wanted it, so I repositioned it. It's easy enough to do that, obviously, before you ink it. Now, I'm going to heat emboss this image because I want my outline to be heat embossed. Once again, with black watercolor cardstock, you need to make sure that you can see the image. So by heat embossing it, not only can we see the image really well, but it also gives a raised edge. I really like that raised edge with watercolor. I just like the extra texture it gives. And I like the fact that it makes watercolor a little bit easier because it gives that ridge so that the watercolor doesn't run into the next space. I'm choosing a pale gold embossing powder from my stash for heat embossing this image. I think it's going to give a nice contrast to the colors that I plan on watercoloring this image with. Now you could choose just one single color to do the watercoloring with. I'm going to choose a few different ones because I think it's just going to give a little bit more of an interesting finish to it. Now, when you do embossing, if you have to clean it up, you just want to use a tiny brush to clean up any embossing powder bits that are where you don't want them to go. When I was doing that, I accidentally got a little bit of my sentiment rubbed off there, so I immediately put the embossing powder back on, and we're on the right track. Then I use a soft brush to remove any excess. This particular powder has some gold dust in it. It's got a pearlescent finish, and I think that pearlescent finish has a gold dust, so that's what I was rubbing off there. You can't actually see it on the video, but you can see it in person. Then I use my embossing tool to melt that powder on here. Now for my watercolor, I'm using a mica powder that has a binding agent in it. So when I mix it with water, it's going to create a watercolor that's going to be perfect for black cardstock. I know it's going to show up on black cardstock. You could also use like metallic watercolors. Those will be perfect on black cardstock as well. If you have other mica powders that aren't this, you need to check and see if they have a binding agent in them, because if they don't, when that water dries up, your mica powder is just going to rub off. So you need to make sure that you have something that is suitable for black watercolor or watercoloring on black. And then these particular colors and these particular powders, you could do this on white as well, but it's gorgeous on black. So I have 5 different colors here. I have a green, I have a tealy color, I have blue, purple, and pink. I wanted to have a variety of colors just to have a little bit more of an interesting image once I'm done. So when I'm watercoloring, I'm starting where I want that watercolor to be darkest. I'm also using the piece of paper towel that I have to my right to remove any of the excess ink from my brush. I don't want these leaves to be a completely solid color. I want them to be a little bit darker in color towards the base, or stronger in color towards the base, and more translucent towards the outside edge of the leaf, just to give it a little bit more visual interest. Now I chose to scatter my green leaves throughout the branch. Then I'm scattering my blue-green, my tealy green leaves towards or along the branch as well. I'm going to do that with all 5 colors. I didn't want to have a rainbow order to them. I wanted the leaf colors to be scattered. Another option here would be to do, say, a rainbow order, start with green, then go with the teal, then blue, then purple, then pink, and do it that way. You can already see how well those colors show up on the black watercolor cardstock, and metallic watercolors would have a similar look to this. The only difference would be if you chose different colors. Obviously, it would look different because of different colors. Now, when I'm working on white watercolor cardstock, I typically like to use the re-inkers for my dye-based inks to do that watercoloring. You can't do that on black cardstock because dye-based inks are transparent. So all you would see is the black watercolor cardstock. Even if you put that watercolor on top of it, it would just absorb in. The black is darker than transparent colors, so you wouldn't actually see that color. So there is a different process to watercoloring on black. Another option would be metallic ink pads that are water soluble. I've done that before as well with beautiful results. Now, the only thing with watercolor ink pads is when you add water to them, it mutes or dilutes the metallic ink, so they would just be a little bit lighter. It would have a little bit of a different look to it. But you can watercolor with those and then let them dry a little bit and then add another layer and build that color up. So now I'm working on the purple watercolors. Now I just mix the mica powders with water on the lids for those particular powders. Then I will set them to the side, let them completely dry before I close those. It's really convenient to use those lids. Another option is, say, like the top of a sour cream container or an acrylic block, or something non-porous is perfect for using as a paint palette for these. But the lids to them, it's just really convenient to do it right on there. And then, like I said, I can set those aside, let them dry completely, and then I can close those containers. And I have the palette, if you will, for that particular color right with that container. The brush that I'm using has water in the handle, and I find it very convenient because I tend to be a bit of a klutz. So if I were to have a water or a jar of water on my desk, there's a good chance that I would knock it over or probably drink it. So I like to have the brush that has the water in the handle because I can just squeeze it right on that piece of paper towel to my right to clean that brush out and take the color out to work on the next color. I can also, if I happen to have a little bit too much water on it, I can also just tap it on that paper towel and it sucks the excess water out of there and makes it so that my brush is drier. Now, once I'm done watercoloring here, I thought it'd be nice to have those colored inks splattered on my background. So I'm using a brush and just adding a little bit more water just to make it easier to splatter them. Then I have a little pool of water on my desk here that I'm just using to take that color out of the brush to make it clean for my next color. It's just a little bit easier to do that rather than going to the sink and cleaning my brush each and every time. And then I'm doing that with all 5 colors. I want to have those 5 colors splattered all over the background. I think it just adds some continuity to it, some whimsy to it, and I really like the look of it. So I let my piece completely dry. Now, I don't plan on putting a mat behind this card on the card that I plan to make, but I do want to have a border around it. So I used my embossing pad to rub around the outside edges of that black watercolor cardstock, and then I just dipped the edges of my cardstock in the same embossing that I used for my image. It's just going to add a really subtle frame to it. Now, when you use embossing powder like this, it's not going to have a perfect edge. It's going to be a little bit more organic. I think it works well with this particular image, but it does frame it nicely. It has a completely different look to it. This is a technique that I do regularly, but not every time. It just depends on the final look that I'm going for. Now, this stamp set has some dragonflies and some other bugs. I don't exactly know which ones those ones are. So I'm going to use the dragonfly stamps, and I'm going to use my mica powders again with the dragonfly stamps, but I'm not going to watercolor them. I'm going to use the embossing ink. I'm going to stamp them, and then I'm going to take the dry powder and brush it right on those stamped images. This is another way to use that mica powder. And again, this technique needs to be mica powder that has that binding agent in it for it to work. Otherwise, when the embossing ink dries, the powder will just rub off. So I stamped it with that embossing ink. Then I use a fluffy brush to brush those powders onto that ink. And then I use a Swiffer cloth just to remove any of that mica powder from my background. And then last step here is we need to activate that binding agent with water. So I used my mister to mist that with water and then let that dry completely. The way the video flows, it doesn't look like I actually let it dry, but I do let it dry totally because I don't want to glue that wet watercolor cardstock to my card base. I want to make sure that it's completely dry. Here is the finished result. I love the look of those metallic inks on the black. I think it suits this image as well as the black, the dark background so well. You'll find the Pajama Crafter Stamps products that I've used listed and linked down in this description box below. And if you'd love more inspiration with this stamp set, go check out the Facebook group. There's a bunch of different card samples with this gorgeous set in there as well. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate the time you spend with us. Have a fantastic day.